like that.
I feel as though that's what
Yeah.
it was.
She did.
Yeah, I forgot all about that till now.
Okay, I'm gonna let people in,
Okay,
even though they're not members. I'll let everybody in, I guess, and we'll go from there.
sounds good.
Oh, here's Mike. I see Mike.
Oh,
Let me
good.
let him in. Okay, as soon as he pops up, I will. There he is. We'll rename him.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Olga.
Sorry, I'm late.
No, we're
Not
good. We didn't
really.
start yet, Mike. You're good.
I'm not late.
No, we didn't start yet.
Okay, sorry.
So what do you got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
8.
8.
I count 8.
Well, we're on, so you can call to order whenever you want. 1, 2, 3.
Ready? You got anybody else to let in? You good?
Ryan, I got Ryan, and there's one more person. I'm letting Ryan in now.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, good. I didn't see him there.
Mhm,
All right, I see him coming in now.
mhm.
All right, great. Why don't we going to start right now? YouTube started up.
Yep.
Good. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning Commission of the City of Danbury, September 27, 2022. Let the record show that we will begin with the roll call at 7:33. Commissioner Coelho. Commissioner Coelho is here. Commissioner David.
Yes,
Commissioner Fay.
Here.
Commissioner Hawley.
here.
Commissioner Hylinski is absent. Commissioner Jowdy.
Here.
Commissioner Melillo.
Here.
Commissioner Rea.
Here.
Commissioner Bennett. Absent. Commissioner Duran. Absent. Commissioner Mejia
Yes.
is here. I am Chairman Haddad. Commissioner Mejia, I'm going to sit you for the entire evening for Commissioner Hylinski. Okay. Thank you. The next regular meeting is scheduled for October 11th, 2022. If we can all stand, everyone who has their flags, feel free, and let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let me read into the record our Zoom instructions as ordered by the governor. This meeting of the Danbury Zoning Commission is being held on Zoom as a virtual meeting. Even though this meeting is a virtual meeting, members of the public and interested parties continue to have the opportunity to participate in the meeting in a couple of different ways. You can participate via Zoom and see the audio and video, or you can call in by phone and participate via audio only. Please be aware that we may have to mute your microphone or telephone to avoid an echo or some other background noise. This is also being streamed live via YouTube. Instructions on how to participate in the meeting appear on the City of Danbury website, and all of the documents and materials that apply to the matters to be discussed during this meeting, including the agenda, are also available on the City of Danbury website. As always, if you have any questions, please contact the City of Danbury Planning and Zoning Department. As a reminder, the entire meeting will be posted on and can be seen on the City of Danbury website. We will follow the posted agenda as per standard practice. Prior to the meeting, any questions or comments on agenda items were submitted via email to Sharon Cliccio. Those comments will be read during the appropriate portion of the meeting. Finally, please remember that technology glitches sometimes do occur. Please be patient if that happens. Commission members, additionally, everyone received a copy of the minutes for September 13th, 2022. If anybody has any comments, if not, we'll just go to a motion to accept. Is there a motion to accept the minutes of September 13th, 2022? Motion by Commissioner Jowdy. Is there a second?
Second.
Who's that? Second by Commissioner Rea. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those
Wait, was
opposed?
Joe at the last meeting?
Oh,
Was Joe
oh,
at the
oh.
last meeting?
Oh, Joe.
He can't second because
Commissioner
Was
he
that
Rea,
the
wasn't
last
at the
meeting?
meeting.
Thank you, Joanne. I don't
Sorry.
think you were at the last meeting, so we need someone else to second that. Ms. Fay, I saw your hand up. You're either sneezing your hand up. Second by Ms. Fay. Any discussion? All those in favor, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Not hearing any opposition or seeing any hands, the minutes passed unanimously. Before I get to the first public hearing this evening, I'm going to read the legal notice for this evening. Legal notice. Notice is hereby given that the zoning commission of City of Danbury will hold a public hearing commencing at 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, September 27, 2022, in a web-based meeting hosted on Zoom to consider the following matter. Petition of D&B Wellness LLC doing business as a botanist to amend section 3C4E6D of the zoning regulations, in parentheses, change distance measurement from residential zone boundary for cannabis, hybrid retailers, and cannabis retailers. A copy of this application is on file in the Planning and Zoning Office for public inspection. Parties and interests and citizens shall have an opportunity to be heard at this time. Agenda to be posted will include instructions on how to access the Zoom meeting and application materials, and view the meeting in real time on YouTube. Theodore J. Haddad Jr. Chairman, posted on the city website, the town clerk's office, September 13th, 2022, published in the News Times on September 16th, 2022, and September 23rd, 2022. Purchase order 2023241. Additionally, the first, let me just also read this into the record. The first agenda that went out, the link was not working for the 8-3A Planning Commission recommendation. When it was first noticed, thank you, Ms. Reed, in about an hour and 59 minutes, it was corrected. Town clerk's page was updated, the zoning commission website was updated, and the mailing list of several hundred people was also followed up, correcting that agenda and adding the link. So thank you very much for that, Ms. Reed. First petition this evening is D&B Wellness LLC, doing business as a botanist to amend section 3C4E6D of the zoning regulations. In parentheses, change distance measurement from residential zone boundary and cannabis hybrid retailers and cannabis retailers. The first page of the petition states why this petition should be granted. Distance to residential zone boundaries should be measured from the pedestrian entrance of the cannabis hybrid retailer and not from the legal parcel boundary line. The goal of this section is to protect residential neighborhoods. So measurement from the main pedestrian entrance is more relevant from the legal parcel boundary line, because the main pedestrian entrance is where the regulated use is concentrated. That was a link also on the agenda. Everyone has it, was part of the record. Regarding the Planning Commission, 8-3A recommendation dated September 22nd. The Zoning Commission from an Arnold E. Finaldi Jr. Chairman, Planning Commission, regarding 8-3A referral petition of D&B Wellness. At the web-based Zoom meeting held on September 21st, 2020, the City of Danbury Planning Commission voted to give the above reference petition a negative recommendation for the following reasons. Number one, this does not comply with the plan of conservation development's underlying concern for the protection of residential neighborhoods. Number two, measuring the distance from the lot line is the most conservative methodology to help ensure the minimum distance is maintained and uses are separated, notwithstanding the location of a building on a lot. Number three, this method of measurement protects residential zones from any potential impacts associated with cannabis hybrid retailer or cannabis retailer establishment uses. The motion to give this a negative recommendation was made by Mr. Chioccio, seconded by Mrs. Hofstadter, and passed by roll call vote with 3 ayes from Mr. Chioccio, Mrs. Hofstadter, Mr. Sylvain, and 1 nay from Chairman Finaldi. Okay. Ms. Calitro, I'm looking for you here. I see you. Can you,
I'm here.
can you pick up at the staff report, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
For the record, Sharon Calitro, I'm the planning director. You all have a copy of my staff report dated September 15th, 2022. I'm going to read it into the record to the City of Danbury Planning Commission, City of Danbury Zoning Commission, regarding the petition by D&B Wellness LLC doing business as a botanist to amend section 3C 4E 6D of the zoning regulations, distance from cannabis hybrid retailer and cannabis retailer to residential zoning district boundary. The commission received a petition from D&B Wellness doing business as the botanist to amend section 3C 4E 6D of the zoning regulations, which provides for a distance requirement from a cannabis hybrid retailer or cannabis retailer to a residential zoning district boundary and the method of measurement. The current regulation requires that a lot upon which either establishment is proposed be no closer than 200 feet from a residential zoning district boundary, and that the distance be measured from the lot line of the parcel proposed to be used for said use to the residential zoning district boundary. The petitioner seeks to amend the language of this subsection to measure the distance instead from the main pedestrian entrance of the establishment to the residential zoning district boundary. The petitioner indicates the reasons this petition should be granted is as follows. Distance to residential zone boundaries should be measured from the pedestrian entrance of the cannabis hybrid retailer and not from the legal parcel boundary line. The goal of this section is to protect residential neighborhoods, so measurement from the main pedestrian entrance is more relevant than the legal parcel boundary line because a main pedestrian entrance is where the regulated use is concentrated. As you know, the City of Danbury zoning regulations governing cannabis establishments became effective August 13th, 2022, after careful consideration by the Zoning Commission. The distance requirements that were approved and how such distances are to be measured were those deemed most appropriate to protect the public health, welfare, and safety based on the individual cannabis establishment. The zoning district within which these two uses are allowed by special exception are the CG20 and CA80 zoning districts. Since there is the potential for varied placement of such establishments on any lot and therefore their entrances, amending the language as proposed could actually reduce the required distance from a residential zoning district boundary. This could result in locating these uses closer to residential neighborhoods, contrary to the purpose of the distance requirement. The regulated use is quote unquote concentrated on the lot upon which it is located, not solely at its front door. Measuring the distance from the lot line is the most conservative methodology to help ensure the minimum distance is maintained and uses are separated, notwithstanding the location of the building on the lot. This method of measurement protects residential zones and the predominant residential uses allowed therein from potential impacts associated with cannabis hybrid retailers and cannabis retail establishment uses. The Plan of Conservation and Development, POCD. It's questionable as to whether the commissions could find that amending the language of the regulations in the manner that could actually reduce the distance between these uses and the residential zoning district is consistent with the vision statement of the POCD and the POCD's underlying concern for protection of residential neighborhoods. Irrespective of where a cannabis hybrid retailer or cannabis retailer is located on a lot or where the pedestrian entrance may be for such use, maintaining the 200-foot distance from a residential zoning district boundary by measuring from the lot line, as opposed to the building entrance within the lot, is most protective of the residential districts and the uses allowed in said districts. The regulation, as approved, protects the public health, welfare, and safety. Staff does not support the proposed amendment. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chair.
very much, Ms. Calitro. Can you just confirm for me, Ms. Calitro, that with the planning commission recommendation, it would be a super majority to approve this petition tonight, 6 votes?
Yes, yes, that's correct. Yep.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of this petition? Attorney Mizuko, hello.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Ward Mizuko, and I'm here to present the application this evening concerning the proposed amendment. If it's okay with the chair, I'd like to share my screen and go through some materials with the commission.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope that's visible to everyone. So this is an application to amend 3C4E6D. And let me move on to some of the background. So the history of cannabis activity in Danbury favors a conversion by the botanist to retail hybrid. And what I mean by that is that city commissions and officials have consistently supported the sale of medical cannabis and now recreational cannabis. As you recall, the history when the legislature allowed medical cannabis, the planning commission and planning departments recommended in favor. Zoning commission approved it. When recreational came along, the planning staff and planning commission also recommended in favor, and the zoning commission approved. And along the way, the planning commission granted a special exception to the botanist to operate a medical cannabis facility at 105 Mill Plain Road, the only one in the city. And under that arrangement, fix my screen over here. Under that arrangement, under the medical cannabis regulations, no separation from residential zones was required at all. But the new recreational cannabis regulations require the property boundary to be at least 200 feet from a residential zone. And unfortunately, the botanist falls within that distance and is disqualified from even applying for a special exception to convert to hybrid retail use. And of course, the new regulations prohibit a variance, so there's no path forward to converting the botanist to a hybrid retail use except by an amendment to the regulations. So now that recreational sales are allowed, it would be really impractical for the botanist to continue selling only medical cannabis. If people can go elsewhere without a prescription, that would make it very difficult to stay in business. So if the zoning commission fails to provide relief to the 200-foot distance requirement, but allows other recreational cannabis sellers, the city would effectively put the botanist out of business or force it into another community. We've been signaling our interest in this conversion for more than a year. And since this is a known quantity, an established medical marijuana outlet, it's the most logical property in the entire city for conversion to hybrid retail cannabis sales. You know the building, you know the operation, you know the location. So we doubt that the planning department and the zoning commission ever intended to prohibit its conversion. So we seek an amendment to the 200-foot distance requirement to enable the botanist to move ahead with an application for a special exception. Specifically, the new distance requirement would measure from the main pedestrian access instead of from the edge of the property. So let's talk about how Danbury's requirements fits with those of other municipalities. The planning department indicated that it did not draft its recreational distance requirements with any particular properties in mind, but rather relied on its general research of cannabis regulations in other jurisdictions. From that, the planning department recommended over public objections the 200-foot distance requirement from the property edge to a residential zone. In fact, it's hard to find support from any Connecticut municipalities for the requirement of 200 feet of separation between the property edge and any residential zone. More than half, in other words, 53% of Connecticut's 169 municipalities simply treat cannabis like any other retail use. They don't regulate it. In those municipalities, cannabis facilities can be located in any commercial zone, even if it's right next to a residential zone. That's 90 Connecticut municipalities. Of the remaining municipalities, only 27 have regulations specific to cannabis, and 16 of the 27 do not regulate the distance from the facility to a residential zone at all. There again, cannabis facilities can be located right next to residential zones in those 16 towns, even though those municipalities have chosen to regulate cannabis in other ways. They just didn't think it was important to keep them away from residential zones. So now we're down to the 11 municipalities, including Danbury, that do regulate the distance to a residential zone. And they're reflected on a chart that I'll get to in a moment. And you'll see that only 3 of Connecticut's 169 municipalities have distance requirements consistent with Danbury's. That means that Danbury is actually out of step with prevailing practices and is instead imposing an arbitrary requirement that's inconsistent with much of the rest of the state. So here's the chart. Let me explain how this works. So at the top we have Danbury, and you'll see that it shows that there is a distance requirement from the establishment to residential property. And the method of measurement on the right is from the legal parcel boundary line. And that's what we want to change. Now, the next municipalities, Bloomfield, Branford, Vernon, Manchester, Hartford, Bridgeport, Brooklyn, East Lyme, East Windsor, Meriden, Middletown, South Windsor, Thompson, Torrington, West Hartford, and Wyndham, they all regulate cannabis establishments in some way, but they have no distance requirement to residential zones. So now we get down to the remaining towns. Newington has a 100-foot distance requirement. Enfield has a 100-foot distance requirement. New Britain has a 100-foot distance requirement, but only if the facility is on the same street as a residential area. Suffield is similar to Danbury with 200 feet. Holland has only 100 feet. Ansonia and East Hartford and North Stonington, Suffield is 200 feet, but it's from the structure to the residential zone line. So it's only Ansonia, East Hartford, and North Stonington that have regulations consistent with those in the city of Danbury. And the other 2 have, Stafford has a 500-foot requirement, but that's structure to structure. And West Haven has an 800-foot requirement, but it also is from the entrance of the establishment to the nearest residential zone, which could place it much closer, could place the property much closer than 800 feet. So here again, an examination of Connecticut's 169 municipalities reveals that there are 3 consistent with the city's current regulation, 90 that don't regulate cannabis at all, and all the green ones that you see here that regulate cannabis but don't see a need to separate from residential zones. Now, I'm not saying that we want to jeopardize residential zones. I'm not suggesting that at all, but I'm just suggesting that we approach in a thoughtful way how exactly to do it. And I'll come to that as we move on with the slides. So the Plan of Conservation and Development actually supports the proposed amendment. In addition to its research that it relied on in the staff report, the Planning Department also relied on the Plan of Conservation and Development. And as it should, the Plan of Conservation and Development does support the protection of residential neighborhoods. Nevertheless, the Plan of Conservation and Development also supports economic development in the western part of the city. So here are some relevant provisions. In the vision statement on page 11, it says that the west side will be the focus of future development in the city, hosting new growth industries and creatively designed neighborhoods. And this is a new growth industry. In the West Side District Plan, page 19, the city should actively promote the West Side District as the major center for future economic development. And continues from there. And the Economic Development Plan, page 22, a business climate that creates jobs, expands the tax base, and fosters sustainable economic development. And it goes on to elaborate. And I should mention here that the tax base includes not just the property tax that the facility would generate, but also the 3% sales tax that's unique to the hybrid, to the recreational use, the recreational sales. Right now, the city derives no sales tax from the medical use, but it would derive 3% sales tax from the recreational use. So in light of all this, the POCD actually supports enabling the botanist to convert from medical cannabis to retail hybrid status, provided that it does not pose a threat to residential neighbors. Let's be clear, nothing is changing at the botanist except an additional category of customers. It already has medical customers coming and going to make their purchases. All that's proposed is to be able to add recreational customers coming and going to make their purchases. It's hard to believe that the botanist would all of a sudden become a threat to residents because it would have these additional recreational customers. Now, the Planning Commission recommendation of denial is really based on incomplete information. Based on the Planning Department staff report, the Planning Commission recommended against the proposed amendment by a split vote. The botanist was not permitted to address the Planning Commission and provide any further context to the staff report. Because the Planning Commission lacked all of the information that you're receiving tonight, the Zoning Commission should make an independent judgment based on the evidence before it and should not give undue weight to the Planning Commission's recommendation. The city's liquor regulations, do not support measuring the 200-foot distance requirement from property lines. In addition to looking for consistency among other Connecticut municipalities, we need to examine whether there's consistency within Danbury's own regulations. So the sale of liquor is perhaps the most analogous use to the recreational sale of cannabis, both for adult recreational purposes, regulated for public protection. But in Danbury, a bar or a restaurant serving liquor can be located right next to a residential zone. The only distance requirement that applies in the liquor area pertains to package stores, which must be separated by 2,000 feet. Even then, the measurement is from the main pedestrian access, not the property line, to the main pedestrian access of the other establishment. For consistency, Danbury should use the main pedestrian access of hybrid retailers when measuring to a residential zone. After all, activity is concentrated where people go in and out of the store, not on all four corners of the property. Even within the cannabis regulations, the distance measurements are inconsistent. In the new recreational regulations, some distance requirements are from the main pedestrian access and others are from the property line. To be consistent internally and with the liquor distance requirements, the commission should use the main pedestrian access as the point of measurement. So further, the botanist at 105 Mill Plain Road has no impact on any residences. Of course, zoning regulations, at least theoretically, apply throughout the municipality. As a practical matter, though, the recreational cannabis regulations limit the number of hybrid dispensary and retail establishments. A property owner on Federal Road has applied for a special exception already. If he's successful, then only one more facility can be approved. If the zoning commission approves the amendment so that the botanist can also apply for a special exception, and if it's approved, then the effect of the proposed amendment elsewhere in the city would be a moot point because no other facilities could exist. So just to be clear, if the Planning Commission approves the recreational marijuana sales on Federal Road, and if the Zoning Commission sees fit to allow our amendment so that the botanist could apply for the retail hybrid special exception, that would bring the city to capacity under your regulations. And there wouldn't be another application where a residential neighborhood would be challenged. So as a practical matter, the zoning commission should focus only on whether the botanist will have an impact on any residential neighborhood. Considering whether the proposed amendment will affect other residential neighborhoods is really a theoretical and pointless exercise under the unique circumstances that we have here. As the photos and maps that follow indicate, the nearest dwelling is on a different road altogether. The edge of the botanist property is 500 feet from that dwelling, and the main pedestrian access of the botanist is 617 feet away from that dwelling. The distance from the main pedestrian access of the botanist to the nearest residential zone is 327 feet. And if we turn our attention back to that dwelling, a direct path to that dwelling requires up and down steep terrain and across railroad tracks through dense terrain. It's practically inconceivable that a pedestrian would make that trek. So here we are at the back of the botanist property, and as you see, there's a hill which you have to start over to head toward the residential zone. When you get to the top of the property, this is what you see. If you look real carefully, you can catch a glimpse of the residents in the distance. And you also see that you're at the top of the hill here, and I think you can tell that there's very low land behind here. A little different perspective highlights the fact that there's much lower property below. And if you look carefully, I'm not even sure I can find it now, you can see another glimpse of that dwelling in the distance. But that's how far the facility is from the actual residential neighborhood that we're trying to protect. And then if you go down by Rosie Tomorrow's and you go down to the railroad tracks, which probably a lot of people don't even know are there, on the left here is the steep, heavily vegetated hill that leads you back up to the rear of the botanist property. You have to climb down this hill through all this brush, cross the railroad tracks, and then you get into this dense brush in order to head closer to the residential neighbor. To give you another perspective of it, here we have the botanist right here. Here's Mill Plain Road, of course. Here are the railroad tracks that we saw a minute ago. Here's the Rosie Tomorrow's restaurant. And here's the nearest dwelling right over here. So to get to the botanist, you have to go up the hill, down to the railroad tracks, up another hill through that thickly forested area, and either go through a wetland area or get onto the road to get out to the residential area. So as a practical matter, this residential area is as protected as can be. And if you look at all this here, this is wetland. This is wetland. It may have a residential zone. It's never, ever going to be built on. This is highly protected from anything, any activity that the botanist could generate. And just to elaborate a bit further, this is a topographic map of the area that shows the steep slopes going up from the botanist and then down again to the railroad tracks, all the wetland area that will never be built on, and the uphill climb that you'd have to make to get to that residence if you didn't take the street. And just for reference, this is where Rosie Tomorrow's is. So in conclusion, if the zoning commission fails to amend the method of measuring the distance to this residential zone, it will disqualify the botanist from even applying for a special exception to become a hybrid retailer. The existing medical business will then be effectively pushed out of the community. The amendment is justified and necessary because as an existing establishment, the Botanist is the most logical property in the city of Danbury to become a hybrid retailer. Imposing a 200-foot distance requirement from the property line to the residential zone is inconsistent with the vast majority of Connecticut municipalities, Danbury's own regulations for liquor stores, and even some of the new recreational cannabis regulations, which also use the main pedestrian access for certain distance requirements. The Botanist has no effect, zero effect on the closest residential neighborhood, as you saw from the photographs and the map. And as a practical matter, no other residential neighborhood can be affected if the applications for the Federal Road facility and the Botanist are approved. So that concludes my presentation. I would be delighted to answer any questions, and I'll take this, take the screen down so you have a better view. Any questions
Thank you.
that I can help with?
Thank you, Attorney Mizuko. Yes, let me start off if I could. Can you go over one more time if the Federal Road property got approved and Mill Plain Road became a hybrid, then nothing else would be added to Danbury as per our current regulations? You're saying
Right.
that?
Right, that is part of the limitations imposed by the recreational regulations that your commission just passed.
So are you making that statement based on Federal Road becoming recreation only, or medical, or hybrid? Or it doesn't matter?
Actually, I don't know offhand what specifically he applied for, but whatever it is that he applied for, when I checked it before, plus what we're proposing, the hybrid retail,
Okay.
the combination would fill the bucket, and no more facilities would be allowed.
No, I'm asking these things just to make a record here.
Sure.
Well, I mean, we know the regulations here, but I just want to reiterate them again. So if this petition gets denied and Federal Road gets approved, you're saying that what else can be built in Danbury? You're
The
saying
only other
that-
thing that could be built is a medical dispensary, which has no distance requirement for a residential zone.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to go to Ms. Calitro in a couple seconds also. Can you state for me one more time? You know, I noticed on page 16 that there were page numbers. I was looking for page numbers, so I couldn't refer to it. Then I finally saw it in the bottom left-hand corner. The distance to the existing residential dwelling, you said, was what, 571, 621, something like that?
Okay, so I threw a few numbers at you.
Yeah.
The edge of the property, the Botanist property, is 500 feet from the nearest dwelling. The main pedestrian access of the Botanist property is 617 feet from the Botanist property. And the distance,
What's 617?
okay, so if you measure from the entrance of the
Okay,
Botanist
got it.
building,
Yep, sorry, got it.
and the distance from the main pedestrian access of the Botanist to the nearest residential zone is 327 feet. So separately, I didn't put it in the slide deck, but I have a map that illustrates these distances, and I emailed it to Joanne before. It's in the record, and it confirms the numbers that I've given you here.
Right. So when you go down Federal Road, in fact, when you go down Mill Plain Road, in fact, this commission several years ago saw an interesting petition. It was the, gosh, I think it was across the street from maybe Agway or something. It was a hardwood flooring place. They went in for an approval for a shooting, one of the gun clubs. And they basically immediately adjoined residential neighborhoods, shooting range.
Shooting
Because
range.
if you shooting range, if you go up and down Mill Plain Road, you're going to see that houses bump up right to the back line of pretty much everything on Mill Plain Road, but when you get past the area of the Mill Plain Road cutoff, you see the train tracks, you see large areas of wetland and some warehouses and things like that. So I understand, and by the way, Ms. Calitro's report, I gave her a compliment when she read it in. It was, I think, one of the best staff reports I've seen produced. So I know where she was coming from, and of course, I agreed with it at the time. So this parcel is unique because you have train tracks, you have a very large area of property that's not going to be built on, and it is wetlands. But it's unfortunate for the owner of the botanist that it just happens to be zoned residential. So my question is, and I watched the planning commission and they struggled with it because everybody's trying to find a solution. We did welcome the botanist into Danbury. And I think, I don't know if anybody ever saw this one coming, was recreational, but this is a very unique petition here tonight. And I'm going to have some also additional questions of Ms. Calitro for confirmation on some facts as well. And I think I'm going to leave it open for you so that the commission members can come back to you a couple more times as well, because I want to make this a going back and forth kind of thing here. So everyone here has all of the facts before we can come up with a decision on this. Regarding your other comment that we take an independent study and not go by the planning commission recommendation. We do hear everything here, all facts. Nobody came into this meeting here tonight with a decision already made. We want to hear all the pros and cons and all of the facts, but it is going to require a 6 votes to approve it. Commission members, any other questions? Yeah,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I couldn't hear what you just said. You froze for a second there and I missed a few words.
No, I just wanted to say that this commission independently does take all of the comments pro and con this evening and make their own decision. The referral that we get from the planning commission only dictates how the vote's going to go this evening on approval on supermajority or majority. So you and your client can feel comfortable knowing that we do not enter any of these meetings with a decision already made. We wait to hear what comes out of this meeting before doing so.
Thank you.
Commission members, anything of Attorney Mizuko now? Again, we'll be
Yeah,
revisiting.
I have a comment.
Commissioner David, go ahead.
Yes. I went over and walked the property in the back, okay? And exactly what he's saying, in fact, it looks further if you walk up to the top of that hill, through the cemetery, up to the top of the hill, through the woods, and look down to that valley. You see, the only thing I could see was a tiny little bit of a house over on Joe's Hill, way over, looked about 2,000 feet away, maybe more, okay? Could not see that place to the right that he's talking about. So this place, the back is very secluded by all kinds of natural buffers. So I think your protection for pedestrians and residential is totally, it's like a fortress in the back. So take that into consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner David. Commissioner Hawley.
Yeah, so how far is the parcel line currently from the residential line in the back?
I'm not going to make any answer on that. I'm going to call on Attorney Mizuko to reiterate what was said earlier on that.
And I apologize. I couldn't hear Mr. Hawley's question.
Commissioner Hawley.
Sorry. Yeah, so how far is the nearest parcel line on the botanist property from the nearest residential zone?
It's about 130 feet because the zone line actually runs within the railway easement. That's 130 feet from our boundary.
All right, thank you. Now, how come you're crafting your regulations the way you did instead of changing the distance requirement to 100 feet, as our other communities in Connecticut do?
Well, that occurred to me, but I thought that the real activity occurs at the at the entrances, and I looked at the other regulations elsewhere in the state and other regulations in the city, and it seemed to be more consistent to go by the front door. Could it also be accomplished by reducing the distance requirement to 100 feet? Yes, but I thought that that would probably be less palatable to the commission.
Understood. Thank you. And Chairman, I had a quick question for you.
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner Hawley.
How are we supposed to approach this without being seen as like spot zoning thing? I know it's a unique situation that we're currently in, but is there anything that we should be mindful of?
No, I don't think so. I don't know if Ms. Calitro, you have a comment on that? I don't think spot zoning is anything that plays any part here. This is a distance thing.
Mr. Haddad,
Commissioner Malillo.
this would not be a spot zoning issue as this is a reg change, so it would apply to everything at all regarding this. It's a change of regulation, so it would not be one spot. This would be a citywide regulation change.
Got it, thank you. Now, Commissioner Malillo, I see your hand is up, but I do want to ask, dovetail off of Commissioner Hawley's question to Attorney Mizuko, so I'm going to take the floor one more time. Attorney Mizuko, I know you just had that question from Commissioner Hawley and your considerations of 200 to 100. Have you considered, while still protecting the residential zone, the regulation says 200 feet from any residential zoning district boundary. If there was a language change that said 200 feet from any residential dwelling, that would still protect the residential zone, or I think, and I'm not going to speak for Ms. Calitro at all by any means on this, but I don't want to match that up with what her intent was. But if you were coming in saying 200 feet from a residential dwelling instead of 200 feet from a residential zoning district boundary line, that would work because your dwelling is 500 feet away.
Right, that's yet another way to skin the cat. All of those changes could work.
Okay. Commissioner, thank you. Commissioner Malillo.
Yes, Mr. Haddad, I also wanted to know, I don't know if she still has a question, but I did see when you first asked for questions before you spoke, Commissioner Fay had it looked like she had physically raised her hand, not in Zoom. So I just want to make sure that she doesn't get overlooked if she still has a question.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, I see her picture.
And
now.
I'll yield to Commissioner Fay and then you can come back to me.
Oh, Commissioner Fay, you want to go ahead with a question at this time?
It's not really of Ward, or I'm sorry, of Attorney Mizuko, but it's more of a comment, so I can reserve it.
Are you
More of a
sure?
comment.
Okay.
Yeah, my question was regarding the distance from medicinal cannabis versus the recreational, but I understand that we don't have distance requirements in medicinal, which it's just it seems interesting to me that we're treating it differently, even though it's the exact same product.
Thank you.
So,
Commissioner
Mr.
Malillo,
Haddad, may I
wanna go ahead?
pick up on that first and just ask? I was under the assumption that the distance
absolutely.
requirement was an in general. So the distance requirement would occur as the regs now are, would apply to medical and recreational. But prior to the amendment we just approved, there was no distance requirements. Maybe Ms. Calitro, is that true, or is there no distance requirement for medical, only for recreational?
Ms.
Yeah,
Calitro,
the
please.
latter. The latter is true. Before the new regs, there was no requirement there was no distance requirements for the medical. Now with the new regs, there is still no distance requirement for the medical. There is for a hybrid, because that does both, and there is for the retailer, which sells just the rec.
Okay,
Just the rec.
thank you. That clarifies, and that
Thank you.
helps just clarify something in
Yep.
my mind, not relevant to some of the questions I was going to ask, but that helps.
Continue with the floor, right, Commissioner Malillo?
Yes, please.
Yes,
So first-
absolutely.
First, Attorney Mizuko, I'm sorry, I apologize. I got up to close my door because my daughters were making noise in the kitchen and I didn't want to conflict. Could you repeat what's the distance that you had answered for Mr. Hawley? The distance, the current distance that the botanist is from the residential boundary line?
Sure. It's about 130 feet from the rear of the property down to the zone line, which is roughly where the railroad track is.
Okay, thank you. Because I wanted to note for the record that the News Times did an article in regards to this petition tonight, as well as LAD running a blurb on their news top of the hour news. And I did hear hear those and did see the News Times one. So I want to put on the record that I did see that and hear that. And I heard Chairman Finaldi referenced 20 feet. And I was just curious where that 20 feet number. So it sounds like it's really a 70-foot distance that we're dealing with.
Right. So what happened is at some point, first of all, my client is a tenant in the building. And at some point, the landlord acquired additional land to the rear of the property. And that had that additional land not been acquired, the shortfall would have been 27 feet. Now, because of the additional land, it's about 70 feet. So that I think that's what Chairman Finaldi was thinking about.
Okay, thank you. I was just confused. And also wanted to get on the record that was that other piece of information was out there, and I was exposed to it. I'm sure other members were exposed to it as well. I wanted to follow up on your history aspect of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you remember prior to originally when medical marijuana was passed as an allowed use in Connecticut, did the city have a more restrictive regulation on it than we currently do right now?
Restrictive in what way?
So if I remember correctly, when the law first passed Connecticut, the city of Danbury zoning, we adopted a zoning regulation basically saying that medicinal marijuana could only be sold in a pharmacy and not in a standalone dedicated facility as it is now. I believe it was your client who actually petitioned this commission to make that change from a less restrictive from a more restrictive use to a less restrictive use. So am I correct on that?
Yes, it was, as I recall, there were a few other ways to sell the medical cannabis, but the only practical one was being in a pharmacy. And this commission did see fit to loosen the restriction to become more consistent with state law and to allow the botanist to qualify as a medical marijuana seller.
Okay. So while we did recognize the law, we did have a more restrictive use. And then after some time, we did lift that restriction as we got to see what some of the surrounding communities, primarily Bethel, did, since I believe that was where your applicant was prior to moving to Danbury.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then also I wanted to kind of pick up also on, you mentioned that that nothing is going to change with your applicant if they go from recreational, or if they go from medicinal to recreational or medicinal to the hybrid. Currently, right now, the only people who can purchase from your client must have a prescription prescribed by a doctor or a PA or whatever the authorized prescripting license is, correct?
Right, and so my point was that the only change, there will be no physical changes, there will just be an additional category of customers, those people who wish to make a purchase for recreational use.
Right, but along those lines, would it be safe to say that potentially there is some screening done on your clientele because they do need to have a prescription, and there would be no screening at all on the potential clientele with a recreational use?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by screening, but I gather that in this day and age, physicians are not terribly stringent with respect to the prescriptions that I've read about in the press. But it would be a wider group of purchasers, for sure.
I was just thinking in terms of the the distance requirement with the residential versus the medicinal or recreational versus the medicinal, in that it could potentially be a different type of clientele. That would be frequenting those, where I was thinking at least the medicinal people need to go see a physical doctor or something to have a prescription first, rather than just somebody coming in off the street. Without that, that's where I was talking about the screening. I'm not talking a major screening, but there's at least some. It's almost like the bartender saying, you know what, you've kind of had too much. I'm cutting you off tonight, type of a mentality.
Right, but of course, there's no on-site consumption, so it's a little different than the bars and restaurants, which can be right next to any residential area in the city. Here, there is a separation, and the consumption is off-site, typically at home.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of the potential people visiting. You could have a different type of clientele at a recreational than you would at a medicinal. Is that safe to say?
I leave that judgment call to you. I don't see it that way, but
Okay. I think that's all I have, Mr. Haddad.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Malolo. Thank you, Attorney Mizuko. Commission members, anything else of Attorney Mizuko at this time? Anything else of Attorney Mizuko? I don't see any hands or hear anybody, so I'm now going to go to.
I got a hand.
Commissioner David, go ahead.
Yes, Attorney Mizuko. Attorney
Sure.
Mizuko?
yes,
Yes,
sir.
go ahead.
Yes. In regards to what Mr. Melo said about the screening, let me ask you a question. Knowing the business model of the botanist, you have a pharmacist there, you have a whole bunch of staff, it's pretty controlled and pretty organized. Wouldn't you say it would be, irregardless who came in to buy it, whether it was had a prescription or recreational, wouldn't that be a safer environment than what's going on now in the streets of Bridgeport, Danbury, etc.?
Well, sure. The controlled sales are better than street sales in many respects. Here, there's security. There are security personnel present. There are security systems and cameras everywhere, so that on-site activity is closely monitored. Also, the substance itself is cultivated and tested to be of uniform quality, and it's unlike what is sold on the street, sometimes laced with drugs. So for all those reasons, this will be a much more controlled environment. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner David. Thank you, Commissioner David, Attorney Mizuko. Anything else of Attorney Mizuko at this time? I'm not going to see if there's anyone.
Yeah, if I may just.
Go ahead. Yeah, Attorney Mizuko. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that every applicant who comes to this commission for almost any sort of approval is interested in knowing sooner rather than later how the commission is going to go on it. And what I would just say here is that here the urgency is unique. As we talked about a few minutes ago, there are a limited number of opportunities to have a cannabis license in Danbury. And the botanist is a known quantity, it's in operation, and it's the most logical place to become a hybrid retailer. So if the commission could see its way to taking a vote sooner rather than later, that would be enormously helpful, because other applications could come in at any time.
Thank you. I wanted to talk to you about timing, but I was going to reserve that chunk toward a little bit later, but we can revisit that again. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this petition? We're on the in favor portion. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak in favor of this petition?
I would like to.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rizzo.
Oh, Mr. Rizzo, yes, go ahead, please. Just state your name if you would.
Yes, it's Tony Rizzo Jr. I'm the owner of the building at 105 Milkland Road that the botanist occupies. And I think when you look at the location of the botanist and where it is, it's a very good location for the type of product that it's selling. But in addition to that, it's been established now for about a year and a half at that location. I think they've proven to have tight security, proven to be a good neighbor there. There hasn't been any issues outside of that facility. And as Attorney Mizuko said, it's purchased and people leave with it. When we talk about the type of clientele that could go there, if it's not just medical and now it's a hybrid, when people can talk about liquor stores or that type of thing, if we're trying to get to the type of clientele, look at the clientele at times that walks into a liquor store, and yet that's acceptable. So when I look at this, I think the location that's there, the establishment that's already there, the fact that they already have their security in place, I just believe it makes sense to approve this and to allow them to continue the business the way they do. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Commission members, any questions of Mr. Rizzo at this time? Commission members, is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone else wishing to?
Commissioner Haddad, I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Rea, go ahead, please.
So there was reference made to a establishment on Federal Road. Is that Federal Road Danbury or Federal Road Brookfield?
No, it's Federal Road in Danbury. It's not before us yet, but I think it's been in some publications or somebody's been talking about a provisional license that the state has granted to someone that may be coming in with a petition to this commission for a property in Danbury on Federal Road.
Mr. Haddad,
Okay.
I believe that goes before the planning commission, not us. That's the
Oh.
procedure here. And the
Okay.
application has been accepted, but in a public hearing, I believe, has been set by the planning commission. but it's
That's
not-
where I saw it. Okay, yep,
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
yes. Thank you,
That
Commissioner
hearing
Malone.
takes place in early November.
That's right. It's the first week in November, right? The first meeting in November for planning?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this petition? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this petition? I'm now going to go to those wishing to speak in opposition to this position, if any, but a letter came in on time, but not on time for me to get in front of me to read, but it came in on time to the department. I'm going to have Ms. Calitro read that in, if you can, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it was a voice message left on
Oh,
my
okay.
line today. Yeah, so at 12:13 p.m. It says, "Hi Sharon, my name is Diana Smith and I live on Benson Drive, a residential community that is very close to the medical dispensary on Mill Plain Road. I do not feel the zoning law should be changed to accommodate this medical dispensary because they knew they wanted to sell cannabis when they came here. And they should have bought a larger building with a very large parking lot when they opened this one because there is hardly any parking there. The traffic on Mill Plain Road will be horrendous now since more businesses are coming in, and that with cars that would be waiting on Mill Plain Road, it's going to be detrimental to the people that live in this neighborhood and are going to the businesses. So I just hope the zoning amendment of feet that is supposed to be changed is not going to be changed. If you want to give me a call, I would appreciate it. I'm at 203-744-5317. Their parking lot, even for medical dispensary, is not that big, but you get people going in there to buy cannabis. This is going to be a nightmare. I feel the zoning should not be changed to accommodate someone who wants to do both because they knew that when they moved there. I can't go to the meeting. I'm a senior and I don't do Zoom or the internet. Thank you for your time. I appreciate anything you can do to keep the rules in place. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Attorney Mizuko, we'll let you talk again after we hear all of the opposition, if there's any more additional to that. And I might have a comment on that opposition letter, comment as well. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposed to this petition? Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this petition? Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this petition? I see a hand just went up from Xenia Green. Is that correct? If you would unmute, state your name and address, and you have the floor.
Hi, yes, my name is Senya Green. And
There you go.
Hi, I live on 21 Birch Street. I am also in opposition to this change. I think that much like the caller, this is something that's new, that's being brought into Danbury, and we should keep the distance to the 200. When I did a cursory look at other states that have had this law in recreational use in place a whole lot longer than us, Colorado and Massachusetts. I heard in last month's meeting that I listened to on video that we were being very conservative with this 200 feet requirement. In actuality, in those two other states, they're 500 and 1,000 feet, and it's from the lot line, not from the entrance of the establishment. So I am in agreement with the previous caller in opposition to this. And I don't know if this is the proper time, but I had some questions as well for the Mr. Mizuko. And I'm not sure.
Well, and why don't you just go ahead with what you have, read what you have, and then when it goes back around to him, he could address those if he likes.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Very fair. And now I'm not a councilman and I'm not a planning commission individual, so forgive the.
You're doing just fine. Don't you worry about it. Take your time and tell us what you got.
Just from listening to his PowerPoint presentation, I just had some questions for him. Does he have an example of a municipality that is hybrid, that is that have a residential zone in place? I think he did answer that in the PowerPoint. He mentioned 16 towns that had no requirements for the distancing for residential or recreational use. How long have those towns had recreational cannabis in place? And what is the population in those towns? My other question was, he said that because there's another potential candidate on Federal Road being looked at for recreational cannabis, that would ultimately put this business out of business because there will be no other hybrids allowed in Danbury. My understanding that based on the law, that's over 300 pages, and I'm not going to say that I read all of it, but I was trying to get through it before this meeting today. It sounded like the law was based on the population, and I could be totally wrong. So I just wanted to circle back to that unless there's a special caveat of the law that's different in Danbury than what was proposed by the state, it seemed like that the amount of hybrids were based on the population of the town. And currently Danbury's population is X, but we don't know in 2, 3, 5, 10 years what the population of Danbury is going to be. And we know that 35,000 people came into Connecticut from New York because of COVID. So I'm sure that we can see another explosion in population. And is there a possibility that the botanist could purchase another location to open up in hybrid format so that we don't have to change the laws for the distance and they can remain in business? And that's all the questions I had.
You did very good. I saw from the corner of my eye, Attorney Mizuko was taking some notes. So when it goes back into his court, I'm sure he'll address those. But I am going to ask the commission members if they have any questions of you. So stay right there if you can. Commission members, are there any questions of Ms. Green at this time? Commission members?
Mr. Haddad,
No?
if I may just make a quick
Oh,
statement.
Commissioner Malello, please go ahead.
Just a quick statement, just in case Ms. Green loses connection or something, so she can at least know that Danbury's law is a little bit different than the state's law, because Danbury in our zoning regs, we set in our regs a max number of facilities that can be used. So it's not like the package stores, for example, in the state of Connecticut, is based on population. The state tells each municipality how many package stores the city can have. But our zoning regs that we adopted for recreational and medicinal cannabis set a max number in those regs, which is different from the states. That's where you heard the number from.
Are you good with that, Ms. Green?
Yes, thank you. So
Good.
the maximum for Danbury is 2.
Yeah, with Danbury set its own regulations, Commissioner Malolo wanted to let you know it was a little bit more, it wasn't based on population like liquor stores.
I'm not going to confirm that number because I'll need to ask Ms. Calicho for help
We're
on
going-
that one too. So,
we-
so we'll wait till that comes a little bit later, but I just wanted to clarify that.
We heard a representation from Attorney Mizuko, but I left it open for Ms. Calicho when we get to her to tell us what she's got to say about it. All right, anyone else of Ms. Green at this time? Okay, I'm going to continue on with those wishing to speak. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this petition? Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to this petition? Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to this petition? I'll now go to Attorney Mizuko if you'd like to rebut anything that you heard this evening, and also any other additional comments, and also if you'd like to answer any questions of Ms. Green. Attorney Mizuko.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the comment, the voicemail from Diane Green, I think the address was Benson Drive, which would be the opposite end of Old Ridgeberry Road from where the botanist is located. It's got to be 3/4 of a mile away, perhaps more. So I'm not sure how she would.
No,
be-
Ms. No, it was Diana Smith, the telephone call that came in. She was on Benson Drive. And I
Right.
think Ms. Green is on Birch. I think she said Birch. So yeah, with the telephone call that came in was from Diana Smith, and she was on Benson Drive.
Yes, thank you. And I think that's the other end of Old
Yeah.
Ridgeberry Road and
Yes.
quite a distance, and really completely unimpacted by the regulation change. And Ms. Green, you're on Birch Street, so you're not close to here either, I take it. Okay. So in response to your questions, the population of the municipalities ranges from Connecticut's largest cities to some of its smallest towns like Thompson. And I think Commissioner Melillo beat me to the punch in mentioning that because Danbury has its own regulation, the effective population growth won't increase the number of potential facilities in town. Concerning the possibility of going to another location, this building is already uniquely designed, laid out, and oriented, especially with security features, to accommodate a cannabis use, and it would be senseless really to relocate to another facility. It just wouldn't make economic sense. I hope that responds to all of your questions.
Okay, did you have anything else that you want to follow up through on?
No, I think that really covers it, Mr. Chairman, but I'd be, again, happy to address any further questions or
Yeah,
concerns.
so you said before, if this petition gets denied, you're saying that another facility could open up on Mill Plain Road if it meets the present zoning regulations?
Well, I think it would have to be at least a mile away.
Right,
But other than that, yes, a facility could open up anywhere else.
okay, so then the issue, one of the issues of Diana Smith on Benson Drive about all of the additional recreational traffic going into the botanist location. If they get denied tonight and somebody else opens up within a mile away on Mill Plain Road for recreation, that same traffic would still exist on that road regardless.
Right.
You should have picked up on that, Attorney Mizuko.
You got me.
Anyway, anything else? Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the new food store that opened up, which is just a wonderful facility on Mill Plain Road, is going to dwarf whatever traffic might be added by the recreational use.
Thank you. So now I'm going to go, before I go to Mr.
Honestly,
Fleischer, I'm going to ask the
I
commission
wasn't
members
gonna-
if there's
yeah,
any
still
other
a notice.
questions of Attorney Mizuko.
The other one's a little polished, but maybe you
Commissioner
still have
Coelho.
a cup of
Talking.
coffee?
Commissioner Coelho, your mic is off. Did you have a question? Nope, he went back on. One
Okay.
more
Sorry about
time.
that.
That's okay. One more time. Any questions of Attorney Mizuko by commission members only, before I go to Ms. Calitro? I don't see or hear. I'm now going to go to Ms. Calitro. Ms. Calitro, comments on what you heard this evening and take some questions from us, if you would.
Sure. So just to clarify what Ms. Green said and what Commissioner Malillo spoke about and Attorney Mizuko, there was an additional public act. She was correct that there was a limitation on the number of establishments based on population. There was a follow-up public act this year that actually deleted that. And then once we established our own regulations, we quantified the number of establishments that could be in Danbury. So there was something at one point, and then it was gone at the state level, and now we have our own regulations in place. To that, let me just clarify, the regulations right now allow 2 different scenarios, either 2 hybrid facilities or 1 hybrid and 1 medical dispensary and 1 recreational dispensary on the recreational sales sides of things, and then 1 micro cultivator, but we'll leave that out of the discussion because that just confuses things. So
Yes,
we're in
please.
this scenario. Let's just remember the petition is to amend the regulations, not a site-specific petition. So what this does is now opens the door for another establishment to be located on lots that we had looked at and thought and wouldn't necessarily kind of meet the 200-foot radius, 200-foot distance requirement. So it does open the door for other lots in the CG20 and CA80 to have one of these uses by amending the regulations. So let's just be cognizant of what it does. Thank you, Attorney Mizuko, for giving and presenting the support for a distance requirement, because you made our case, basically. Other towns, some do nothing, some don't have any regs and just treat it as a retail use, as you said. Some have regulations, some are more stringent than ours, and some are more relaxed. We felt it was kind of a median ground. And we also were concerned in drafting the regulations, as I testified, when we were considering those regulations, to look at the zones and what land and how what was behind those zones, like what was the next adjacent zone, and what could happen if something went on, one of these establishments went on a lot that was adjacent to a lot in a residential zone. So we did look at all of that. As to, and we should decide for ourselves, irrespective of what other communities do. And he's right, East Hartford has a 200-foot setback. There's a couple in Massachusetts, I think, that have 200-foot setbacks as well. And they're not all the same. The analogy to liquor stores is just, I don't think it's appropriate. Liquor isn't a Schedule I drug. It's illegal at the federal level. We understand all of that. We understand the state passed the Public Act. We did what we needed to do, but it's not the same as alcohol. Again, I just wanted to remind you that these are regulations. This is a regulation change, and I can give you an example of what could happen. And let's just be clear, this is wants to measure from the front door to the residential zoning district boundary, the front door of a building to that boundary. It's not the way the regulations are written right now. It is lot line to the lot line on which the use is located to the residential zoning district boundary. And so the proposal is to change how that measurement occurs so that you measure from the front door. And in the case, there are some buildings along, for instance, Mill Plain Road, that have front doors and back doors. And so now, as I indicated, that lot, if you measured it that way, that lot could house an establishment now if the law were changed. So again, just be cognizant of what the potential impacts are. I just want to make one other comment. So again, back to there is a a petition in for the Federal Road property. That has not been heard, has not been decided, has not been evaluated. That could be denied for the whole host of reasons. Just because it meets the distance requirements, it could be denied for some other reason. I don't know that it will. I haven't looked at it. Staff is, doing its analysis at this point, but that's before the Planning Commission. And the botanist is approved as a medical dispensary. So if you're in the scenario of one hybrid, one medical, one rec facility, and they stay as a rec facility, you could have a hybrid somewhere and another rec facility in Danbury. So 3, not 2.
Wait, sorry. Just repeat that last sentence one more
Sure.
time.
Sure. So
Please.
under the scenario that the botanist is a medical facility, now non-conforming under the current regs because it doesn't meet it. So there's 1 medical, 1 recreational, and 1 hybrid. That's 3, could be 3 separate facilities. So again, if the Federal Road property were to get approved and the botanist stayed as a medical, because this doesn't go through, you could have a hybrid somewhere, or they become the hybrid and you still have the potential for a medical somewhere, irrespective of whether or not that's, from a business standpoint, that makes sense. But so 3 is the number, not 2.
Got it. Yeah, it gets a little,
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a little confusing.
I'm gonna go to Commissioner Melillo, Ms. Calitro, for a second. We'll bounce back to you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Melillo, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Ms. Calitro, real quick, I'm not sure if I misheard. Did you say that currently the botanist is now non-conforming?
Sure.
So, and I thought there was no distance requirement for a medical
Yeah, but
facility.
the laws changed, so he's pre-existing. I didn't say he was illegal. He's just
No,
not. They're not.
I know,
Yeah.
trust me, I am fully aware of.
Yeah.
See, I was originally thinking it was gonna be pre-existing non-conforming, but then I
Yeah.
thought in the conversation that our current regs did, I wasn't sure about, like I said, I wasn't sure about the way the distance requirement was. I thought earlier it was said that there was no distance requirement for a medicinal facility, only for recreational. Is there a distance requirement for medical as well?
Okay, I'm going to answer that by giving you some history. So when my petition in August was approved, that changed what was in the zoning books for medical dispensaries. Okay, so now so at the time before the amendment was passed, and prior to the moratorium, the medical was the only one that was allowed, had no distance requirement. Fast forward, we have new regulations, and the current regulations under the medical only have no distance requirement. The hybrids and the rec retailer have the 200-foot distance to the residential zone.
Okay, and so
The cannabis, let me just say, the medical has distance requirements for other things, but for the residential zoning district boundary, that only applies to the retailers and the hybrids.
Right, and so currently the botanist is only a medical dispensary, correct?
Right, so, you know what? Yeah, so they're not, I wouldn't say they're non-conforming.
So
They
they
wouldn't
are,
be
they are,
non-conforming. Yeah,
they
yeah,
are not non-conforming.
yeah, I think you're right, Ashley. So I
Okay,
stand corrected.
okay,
But they
They're-
exist, they exist in that, they take that category out of the 3,
sure.
right?
I can see where you, because I'll be honest with you, I came into this hearing
Yeah.
tonight thinking that they were non-conforming, and then you clarified that earlier, and then with everything that came up,
Yeah.
you said that, so that's where I wasn't sure. I just wanted clarification on that.
I just don't know, I mean, there may be something else that they don't meet, but
Mhm.
because there's no distance requirement for the medical, they're not non-conforming on that.
I
They
understand.
may
Yeah,
be non-conforming because they don't have enough parking, right?
Yeah, I'm
So
not
take-
holding-
That's an easy one,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm not holding you to anything else. It was just the distance requirement, what I was thinking. And then
This is
to
fine.
just to ease my mind, are there parcels on Mill Plain Road and or Lake Avenue extension, which is also the CG20 zone, where it would be theoretically possible to have a recreational medical marijuana facility. If we measured from the front door, where the property itself is actually large enough where the property would border on a residential neighborhood, if we measured from the front door.
Sure, I just gave you, the example, I could just give you an example if you want to hear.
Well, no, that's okay.
See-
So like, I'm not, because
So
while
again, you're just asking, does it open the world of lots that might be available for this hybrid if you make this change? Is that what you're asking me? Does it
Yeah, 'cause
open
I'm
the world, right?
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
thinking
the answer
is-
is yes.
yeah, because
absolutely.
like this particular lot might be nicely screened in, and there's development where you can't develop wise, and the hill and the rocks, but there could even be a natural iron gate for say. But there are other properties down the road that wouldn't be as plausible as this one, which would be impacted by this change.
That's correct. I'll give you an example if you want me to do that. I have
I
an
don't need-
example which
Yeah, I don't think I need to one, but if any other commissioner member wants one,
Yeah.
Yes, give us an example.
Okay, so do you know, we know where the, do we know where the CVS is on Crestdale?
Yeah,
Across from Stop and Shop on Middle Plain Road. Across from that CVS, on the other side of Crestdale is the Hyatt Building. That
yeah,
has two entrances. That has two entrances. That lot abuts a residential zoning district boundary. So that's RA 40 on Crestdale, right behind that
Right.
lot. So if that lot today would not comply because the lot is not 200 feet from the zoning boundary. But if you change the regs because there's a back door on the Hyatt Building, or actually a front door and a bed, they're double, that you could
Yeah.
potentially put a facility in that building now
got it.
with the reg
Thank you.
change. And all I'm saying is that's kind of an example because we all know that, that building, you drive by it.
Yep.
Thank
Yep,
you, Ms.
got it.
Cleacher. I was thinking there's probably some other parcels too, just knowing that whole
Yep.
stretch. So I
Sure.
was,
On White Street, there's CG20 all out White Street, all the way out to Federal Road.
Thank you, Commissioner Malone. Thank you, Ms. Cleacho. I have a question as well, but I'm going to ask other commission members. Did anybody have any questions of Ms. Cleacho? Commission members?
I do.
Who's
ahead.
Commissioner Hawley? Go ahead. Then we'll see Commissioner David. Go ahead. Commissioner Hawley, why don't you go ahead first?
Sounds good, thank you. So yeah, is there any other regulations that use the main pedestrian entrance as the base point for any kind of measurements, or is that unique to this petition?
No, it's the package stores use it, and in this regulation, the lot line to the pedestrian entrance for both of these are measured for the dispensary and the hybrid. When it comes to schools, public land and schools, I'm sorry, yeah, public lands and schools are measured from the entrance. It's the residential zoning district boundary that's lot to lot, as well as some other things. I mean, you have to go through the regs and kind of, I have a chart on how you measure and which things are measured from where. It's I'm not being as clear as I could be, but if you read the regulations that we just approved, some things are measured from the pedestrian entrance to the use, to the lot on which another use is, for instance, a school, and some things are measured lot to lot. The purpose of the residential zoning district boundary is to give the most distance you possibly could from the residential zone. Not use to use, just from the residential zone.
Understood, thank you.
yeah, Ms. Cleacho, if I may then, so what you're saying is commercial to commercial or commercial to industrial would be door to door, but to a residential zone is where we're concerned about the lot line.
You don't even have to measure on a commercial or an industrial district. I mean, again, we're talking about the CG80, CG20 zones, right? So you're in that zone, number one. Are you 200 feet away from a residential zoning district boundary, lot to lot? That's the first thing. And then there's other public lands, there's schools, there's childcare. Those things are measured door to door.
Good, everybody good right now?
Not,
Anybody else?
let me clarify, not door to lot. I should door to lot, not door to door.
Anything else of Ms. Khalid?
Okay, I'm ready.
Commissioner
I'd like
David,
to
go
ask a-
ahead, please.
Yes, Sharon, when
Yes.
you wrote the distance requirements for this amendment, did you realize that you were writing out the botanist when you did that?
I didn't look at it specifically I looked at it overall over the course of the city in those zones, what would make the most sense. And if they fell into it, they fell into it, they fell out of it, they fell out of it.
Well,
I mean,
let me tell you, because I wouldn't ask I made the motion to approve your amendment. Had I known about that technicality or that zone line in back of it, I wouldn't have made the motion, because my whole basis to make that, to approve your motion was for the safety, for the control, and all the things against the bad use of marijuana, the distribution on that's illegal. Okay. Because
okay. So, but I don't
the
understand
model
why,
this
why,
botanist has.
why would, and you could vote whatever way you want. I mean, you've heard the record is here.
Well, I made the motion.
But I'm just saying, why would that change why you would have voted one way or another? We didn't write a reg to
Because
fit
if you
somebody
remember
who
what
was
I,
here.
if you
We
remember
wrote
what
a
I
reg.
said, if you remember what I
heard
said,
you said.
my whole basis on proposing that was because I'm concerned about the safety. I don't want to use it. I don't want people to use it, but they're going to use it. And
Right.
the model that these people have, okay, is a very safe and secure model. So you're right in the model of the business is what you're doing on the recreational side. And they have a buffer, which is an additional safety factor.
All I'm saying is that with all due respect,
So,
you can
it's
vote
very
whichever way you
impractical.
want, but you, if that was your basis for your decision, I think that was what the right thing to do when you did it in August, because that's how we wrote it from a citywide perspective. We took everything into consideration. If you're saying I should have written a reg for the city, the entire city, on recreational marijuana that helped one particular person in one business, then
Well,
that's
it wasn't
a
one
different.
particular, it was for the safety, okay?
Well, that's what
I
we
don't care
did.
about the money.
But that's what I did. I looked at models
Yeah,
all over. I'm not gonna have that, my argument for why the regs came. The regs are here. So, I mean, you can make a decision on this if you want to amend it. I'm just saying, understand that if the botanist, if the regulation is amended, then, and the botanist can now apply, fine. The one on Federal Road might not get approved for one reason or another. We don't know. Now, I'm just saying you've now opened the availability of other sites throughout the city by virtue of how you're measuring. That's all.
Got it. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to question or have any questions for Ms. Calitro at this time? Commissioner Malolo, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ms. Calitro, just for clarification, and I apologize because I don't have our new reg in front of me right now.
I do.
And yeah, I knew you did. That's why I'm asking you. That's why, and my apologies for my asking this to you is because I don't have it in front of me. It was mentioned in the staff report, and I believe by Attorney Mizuko, how I believe our regs prohibit use variances for cannabis sales. That would also apply to a change in the distance requirement, I believe. So that's one of the reasons why we're here, because the botanist couldn't say I have a hardship because we already have this sale and we are almost there where 27 feet shy with the original number, 70 with the new one. And that's the basis of my hardship. That is not allowed under our current regs. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank
Can't
you.
get a variance from, can't get a use variance, can't get a variance from any of the provisions of the new regulations.
Okay.
That's,
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else of Ms. Calitro at this time? So one more time, Ms. Calitro, I asked you and I asked Attorney Mizuko, what happens if the petition, this petition tonight gets denied? So I'm going to ask you, what would happen if this petition tonight gets approved? What, and they then become a hybrid. They'll have medicinal and recreational at that location. And Federal Road gets approved. What else can come into Danbury? Anything else, or is it done? And then I have a part- then I have a
somebody
part
that
B.
wants to do, right now, somebody that wants to do medical. And
Okay,
again, assuming all that, I mean, they have to, again, understand the botanist has to go back to the planning commission and get a new special exception, right?
Right,
So
right,
that's a
right.
process too, and they, you know, everybody understands that, but under all of your assumptions, yes, there'd be one, let's just say, one ticket left, and that would
One
be
ticket, perfect
one
way to
ticket
say
left
it.
for a medical, for a
Okay.
medical.
As opposed to if they get denied, there'll be more than one ticket.
Well, they would hold the medical, and
hold the medical.
there'd be a hybrid ticket left, a hybrid ticket. Again, under your assumption, they stay in business as medical, Federal Road gets approved, what's
Yeah.
left, there's a hybrid ticket left.
A hybrid ticket, okay. And if they, okay. So here's the interesting spin on this. How, well, I'm not gonna put you on the spot. What I'd love to do is to ask you this question, but I won't, but I'm gonna. What if Attorney Mizuko, as I asked him, what if Attorney Mizuko came in with a petition that proposed amendment that changed the existing regulation from 200 feet from any residential zoning district boundary to 200 feet from any residential dwelling? Would that make a difference to you? I mean, it would.
Professionally, I don't want to do it from a building that's
Yeah,
a like you could have a residential, there's houses in the CG20s, in the CA80 zone that pre-existing before
Right.
the CA80 came to be.
but they'd
So,
still be.
so now
still-
that could be more difficult. So they could go to 100 feet and you could decide 100 feet, safe enough. Let's
I
change it to 100 feet. You could do
Well,
that.
I understand that. I just thought that, I thought when we say that we want to keep the facilities, we generally want to keep the facilities, let me put it bluntly. We want to keep the facilities or any people from assembling in the parking lot away from houses. I guess that's a really simple way to say it. But to say 200 feet from the boundary line of the facility, 200 feet to a residential dwelling, is that good enough? I mean, does that do it for you? Is that somewhat of a compromise to protect the integrity of your, somewhere in between your existing regulation and what we could do for these people to continue to operate, to operate under a hybrid? Does that help at all? Does that take a little bite out of both sides to be able to help massage something into place?
I mean, you guys are gonna need to make that. I don't think you can do that on the floor under this petition.
No, I
I'm
don't
just
think we
saying,
can.
so I think I would rather you consider, if that's what you want to do, consider reducing the distance, because it's a point, it's an easy point to measure. There's a
Okay.
lot line, there's a residential zoning district boundary. Oh, I have a house here. Oh, it's a house,
Yep. Yeah.
it's a residential house in an industrial district. We have those too.
All
So
right, so you're saying it's cleaner to just do a
it's just
number?
cleaner. That's
a
why I
number of
wrote it
feet.
lot, that's why I wrote it lot
Yeah.
line to
Okay.
zoning district boundary, because the lot line is fixed and the zoning
Yeah.
district boundary is fixed.
Yeah.
It's mapped.
Okay. Commission members, anything else of,
Mr. Haddad,
Commissioner Malillo? Yes.
if I may, then to Ms. Calitro, is it fair to say that there are other uses that occur in residential zones on open land. For example, play areas, kids may be picking up a soccer game on an open field, which may not be a dwelling. And if we went towards a dwelling, then the sale could be closer to a recreational play area in a residential zone that we may not be intending to happen.
Well, there's a bunch of uses. They're limited, but in residential zones other than single family dwelling, there's other, churches and parking areas and open, right, like you said. I would just rather, I think it's cleaner to take a distance to a fixed point for this purpose, for the residential zoning. It's just easy. I think it's easier and less confusing.
Yeah, so there may be some unintended consequences of using the terminology dwelling instead of the zone line, property line.
Right. Then, I mean, yeah, you have to, and not the least of which you have sending people out to say, is that a dwelling on somebody's property, or what are they doing in that, and that it's a little complicated, a little more.
Sean and Jeff would love that one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I got it. Yeah, it's interesting because this is such a restricted amount of facilities that can open, that even if it does affect the residential zone, it would be so limited. But this is what we have. I understand both sides of it, and I know the rest of the commission members understand both sides of it. Commission members, anything else of Ms. Calitro at this time? Commission members, anything else of Ms. Calitro? I don't see hands or hear any voices. So our options are to have a motion to continue this for a specific reason, to continue this in general, or to close this public hearing. So I would ask the commission members, what's your pleasure? Commissioner Fay.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Members, there's a motion to close the public hearing from Commissioner Fay, and there's a second from Commissioner Melillo. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? So it goes like this. We have a motion to close. It's been seconded and it has been approved unanimously because I did not see any hands or hear any objection. So this public hearing is closed. Thank you.
Mr. Haddad?
Yes, Commissioner Melillo.
Not that I am ready to consider doing this, but I did want to just ask Attorney Mizuko, because he did appeal to us earlier this evening about being expeditious in dealing with this petition. We have 8 members present, if I remember correctly. This needs a supermajority vote of 6, which would mean that if 3 people voted against it, it would be defeated. Would you be comfortable with us voting on 8, or would you? Oh, we have 9 tonight?
We have 9.
Okay, I'm sorry. I remember going back earlier with the numbers. That's right. Commissioner Hawley came in. I'm sorry. I stand corrected.
That's okay. Okay. We don't have any continuation of any public hearings. We don't have any old business for discussion, possible action. We do have 2 petitions. Are we going to refer these out even though we don't have any? Ms. Calitro, are we going to refer out Fairway Asset Management even though we don't have any public hearing date to be determined?
You have to accept them. We have not had a chance to go through them. They are officially accepted at a date following. So this would be the date we'll notify. We'll put it in the town clerk's office when the public hearing date.
Okay, but we can refer it out tonight then.
Sure.
So commission members, under new business, we have a petition for Fairway Asset Management 2 LLC to amend the master plan for the reserve to remove phase 10, public hearing date to be determined. So we're looking to have a motion to receive this petition, refer it out to the planning commission for their recommendation, notify all surrounding communities need to be notified according to state statutes, publish it in the town clerk's office and all of the necessary required publications according to state statutes, and set the public hearing date, which will be subject to change depending on circumstances related to COVID-19, which has yet to be determined. Is there a motion to that effect, commission members? Motion made by
Make a motion.
Commissioner Ray. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Jolly. Any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. All those opposed. Number 2, petition of Fairway Asset Management 2 LLC, Reserve Road C16046 for change of zone from PND to IL 40, public hearing date to be determined. We're going to do this exactly the same way. We want to have a motion to receive this petition, refer it to the planning commission for their recommendation, notify all surrounding communities that need to be notified according to state statutes, publish it in the town clerk's office and all of the necessary required publications according to state statutes, and set the public hearing date as it is scheduled on this evening's agenda, which is subject to change depending on COVID-related circumstances. This public hearing date has not been determined yet. It will be forthcoming. Is there a motion to that effect? Motion by Commissioner Jolly. Is there a second? Anyone want a second? That second by Commissioner Fay. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
I do not
Oh.
see any opposition or hear any. For reference only is a petition of Delaware MMP Realty LLC, property owner, City of Danbury, 40 Apple Ridge Road, E17061 and E17061-1 for change of zone from IL 40 to RA 40. Public hearing scheduled for October 25th, 2022. Petition to Evelyn L. Wells, trustee, and L. Manuel Andrade for Tiesto Restaurant, 215-219 Main Street, I-14230 for special permit for cafe liquor license in the CCBD zone. Public hearing is scheduled for October 25th, 2022. We don't have any other correspondence. Commission members, are there any other matters? Are there any other matters? Are there any other matters? I don't see or hear.
Just a quick clarification, Mr. Haddad.
Commissioner Malillo, yes, please go ahead.
Is it right now, is the only potential item on our next agenda this petition for the public hearing we close this evening, or have we passed the deadline for any liquor licenses?
Yes, that's correct. You're correct.
That is
Okay.
correct.
So
Thank you.
so at our next meeting, the only thing we'll be considering besides administrative approval of minutes would be the public hearing we had this evening.
And that is October 11th. That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, I just wanted to
As far as
put
I
that
see.
out. I just wanted to
Can-
put that out there so people could be thinking about that we may want to come prepared for that at the next meeting.
Also,
Is it
we'll have,
possible? Is it possible to make a motion to move it to old business for possible action tonight?
we went by that, but I guess it would still be possible.
I would
I-
second that, if that's a
Public-
motion.
I think what I intended to do was to close the public, make a motion to move, to close the public hearing and then move it to old business for possible action this evening.
I think you could do that if you'd like, and we'll see if it
Yeah.
applies.
We can because we haven't closed the meeting yet, so it's still doable.
In fact, you've asked that under the other matters, so it fits. So, so why don't you, go ahead. Why don't you make that motion if you'd like?
Sure, I would like to move the petition of the botanist, DBA, I don't remember, wellness, that we heard this evening, to move that to old business for possible action this evening.
So, commission members, give me a second here. We have a motion.
second.
I'll second that, Mr. Commissioner Haddad.
Let me read that in first. We have a petition to bring under old business for discussion possible action, petition of D&B Wellness LLC doing business as the botanist to amend section 3C4E6D of the zoning regulations, in parentheses, change distance measurement from residential boundary for cannabis hybrid retailers and cannabis retailers. The public hearing was open on September 27, 2022. It was closed on September 27, 2022. Is there a second? Commissioner Rea, want to second that? Commission members, there's a motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed. So that passes unanimously. So we are now going to visit number one under old business for discussion possible action, which is a petition of D&B Wellness LLC doing business as a botanist to amend section 3C4E6D, the zoning regulations, in parentheses, change distance measurement from residential zone boundary for cannabis hybrid retailers and cannabis retailers. Commission members, anybody want to start on this? Anybody willing to make a motion for discussion purposes? I see the hand of Commissioner Fay.
Commissioner Haddad, I would like to make a motion to approve the petition of
D&B Wellness LLC, doing business as The Botanist, as set forth in their petition to reduce the distance requirements between the residential zone boundaries to be measured by the pedestrian entrance of a cannabis hybrid retailer. I don't think that it will negatively impact the health, safety, wellness of our community in any way. And I think it's especially important to consider the limited nature in which a retailer of this nature will exist in the community.
Second.
Do you want to make
second
any
it.
reference to the plan of conservation and development on that?
I would like that. Thank you.
you.
I second it.
And there's a second by Commissioner David. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Motion made with reasons by Commissioner Fay, second by Commissioner David. We're now open for discussion for commission members. Any discussion? Commission members, any discussion? I'll give you my comments on this. I voted to oppose the cannabis recreational amendment at that time. I was in favor of this petition when it first came around. It is, I don't want to make it look like I'm backtracking, but in my opinion, at this point, it is of such limited nature and such a restricted amount of facilities that can open. And I also understand the complexities with the state of Connecticut as far as licensing goes. There's a possibility, I believe, that if this was continued without a vote, or if it is denied, by the time the petitioner comes in, if they do with another petition to, for example, change it to 100 feet or whatever, someone could come in and take that license away from them, because it's also limited on the state in a much greater detail, but the numbers are still there. But I think at this point, I have a tendency to agree with this evening, unless I hear some other discussion from any commission members that may change my mind. I'd look for any other further discussion, commission members. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? None else has any other comments?
No.
So we're gonna put it, no, we're gonna put it to a vote. A yes is yes, a no is no. Is that correct? Everybody on board with that? Okay.
Yes.
David was the second on that. Now, Commissioner Fay,
Yes.
Commissioner David,
Yes.
Commissioner Coelho,
Yes.
Commissioner Hawley,
Yes.
Commissioner Malillo,
No.
Commissioner Rea,
Yes.
Commissioner Malillo, no, Commissioner Rea, yes, Commissioner Jowdy,
Yes.
Commissioner Mejia for Hylinski.
Yes.
My vote doesn't matter. I'll vote no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 2, it gets approved.
Thank
7 to
you
2
all
is
very
approved.
much.
Are there any other matters? Any other matters? Any other matters? I would entertain a motion to close this public hearing or to
So
adjourn.
Adjourn.
To adjourn, it's getting too late here. 9:25 is a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Who
Second.
made it? Who made it?
Commissioner Fay made a motion to adjourn and Commissioner Coelho
Good.
seconded. Any discussion?
Okay.
For saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? This meeting is adjourned at 9:25. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.